now. So I want to welcome everybody to this webinar on our anti-corporate censorship policy objectives. I'm going to talk a little bit about how these came to be, what the strategies behind them, go into some detail about how they work, and then talk about how you can make them a reality. When Look Ahead America relaunched earlier last year, we had been dormant for about 2 years, let's say 2 years prior, where we weren't really raising any money, we weren't getting any attention, and it just seemed not to be going anywhere. It was not fulfilling my dreams of what it could potentially become. And I sort of let it fall by the wayside as I focused on other projects. Voter Integrity Project came around. That got a lot more attention for that effort, my project. And I was able to pivot that attention into Look at America. And off the bat, we wanted to get behind something that seemed extremely topical and important at the moment, which was stopping corporate censorship. This was immediately following the aftermath of the President of the United States being kicked off of the most prominent social media platform. And in a way that really bothered a lot of people. As Elon Musk has recently said, Twitter has more or less become the public square. And to take somebody off of that who was engaging in illegal speech for no other reason than really just having a political disagreement, along with all the things that led up to it, such as censoring media reporting on things like Hunter Biden's laptop, or otherwise trying to shape the media, shape coverage by suppressing certain news sources, elevating others, along with a whole raft of other social media and financial firms and technology firms interfering with people engaging in legal activity, be it legal campaign raising money. Well, Amazon Web Services shut that down, or a company like Stripe shut that down. President Trump was raising money. Stripe was sort of the layer underneath their fundraising platform, or one of those other banking firms was underneath. They said, no, we're not going to allow them to raise money anymore. A company like Parler, where people were exercising their First Amendment rights, Amazon Web Services said, no, we're just going to shut you down. And they never really recovered from that. Or a company like Gab, which is a social media account that operates on the basis of our terms of service of the First Amendment, they can't get a bank account. So we started thinking about ways to address that, and there have been a lot of proposals, and I don't necessarily endorse or disagree with any of them. Some of them involve mandates from the federal government. Some of them involve companies being split apart or regulated, and honestly, haven't studied some of those proposals in detail. There's always the issue of unintended consequences, and maybe these ideas would be great, maybe they'd be terrible, but started thinking about ways that we can address this at the state level, because getting anything done at the federal level, it's a big, heavy lift. And at the state that Look Ahead America is right now, and probably will be for the near term, we don't have nearly the level of muscle to get things done at the federal government level. In fact, almost nobody does. I mean, you can look at something like Obamacare. The reality is that was about a 100-year project for the left. And I saw it stumble and fail with Hillary Care back in the 90s, and in the backburner, they tried again, kept trying again, and eventually it succeeded. The point being that it's very difficult to get major public policy initiatives through the federal government. But what's much easier is getting things done at the local and state level. And if you've been following our webinars or some of our other actions, particularly regarding election integrity, all of these efforts have been targeted at the state level, because it's a heck of a lot easier to get things done. When you walk into a state legislator's office, you may be one of maybe a few thousand constituents, and you have several with you, your friends and neighbors, 10, 20 people. That really counts for something. When you walk into a member of Congress's office, though, I mean, you're like 1 in a million. And then you've got 435 of them, and they all have different priorities and all kinds of other things going down, basically being shoved down their throats. They don't really know where to put their focus or attention. It's, at least at the stage we're at now with Look at America, we can't very easily bang our fists on the table and get the federal government's attention. But you, in your community, can very effectively get your state legislators' attention, and that can very easily snowball. So that's where we've been dedicating our effort. So when you look at the federal regulation of things like commerce and communications, they seem to dominate the field there. The sort of the reverse commerce clause are effectively taking the field because the commerce clause prevents states, say, from uh, doing a lot of interfering with businesses, particularly those that cross state lines. So that's why sort of the regulation of these industries, for a long time, the courts have recognized, right or wrong, that these uh, these businesses that operate this way are strictly the domain of the federal government, and state government can't come in and say split up Twitter, right? So we started thinking about ways that state governments actually could have an impact. And if any of you have ever been to your state capitals, I've been at my home state capital in South Carolina, and I look around the horizon, there are high rises, and there are names on top of those high rises, names on those commercial buildings of corporations, tech companies, banks. And the reason they are there is not for the great food and nice weather, but because they have business with the state. They are there to lobby the legislature, lobby and engage in contracting with state agencies. States spend a tremendous amount of money, and they have pretty much complete sovereignty over how they spend that money. They can often engage in restrictive behavior. I think I saw just recently legislation being passed, not even on the state level, but on I think the county level. Some county in California has restricted the state and their contractors from doing business with Florida because of their anti-groomer legislation. Apparently that got a county in California very upset. The states of California, I remember, also restricting business and contractors from doing business with Indiana because they decided to protect women's spaces. So the states have a lot of power of the purse over how their money works. And it's not just the spending, it's also their pension funds and where their money gets managed, because a lot of them are managing or have a role in managing their retirees' pension plans for their workers, or for a lot of the contractors or elected officials, where their money goes and where it's stored. So the state actually has to have a lot of power. It's a little bit like Dorothy from Wizard of Oz. She has all this power the whole time. It's just somebody had to point out to you. You just got to tap those heels together and you're on your way home. And in the same way, the states have a lot of power to fight against corporate censorship. So that's sort of the line of thinking that led us to our public policy objectives on how to fight corporate censorship by using state government power. I'm going to go through the details of these, but fundamentally what it's saying is that if you are a corporation, be it a social network, tech firm, or a financial institution, run your business how you see fit. But if you deplatform people for engaging in legal speech, if you unperson someone for running a legal business, I guess that's your right, but you are no longer entitled to do business with the state in all kinds of different ways. The state can cut off conducting business with that social media company, with that technology company, or with that financial institution. So what it's doing is forcing these censorious, anti-First Amendment, and I believe un-American corporations to make a choice. They can either continue to legalize, to censor legal speech, to deplatform legal businesses, or they can continue to enrich themselves with government contracts. So they have to make a choice. And my belief is that many of them, especially if it's a small state, at least initially it becomes a free speech state like Oklahoma or Montana, or maybe they don't have a huge population, those businesses might say, look, we want to retain, and we intend to retain our right to censor legal speech that we don't like, that we disagree with. And you know, Montana, Oklahoma, South Carolina, you can take your government contracts and shove it. But by doing that, they're creating an opportunity for companies, for tech firms, for social networks, for financial institutions that respect the First Amendment, respect legal speech and legal businesses, to get that contract, to get those pension funds, to get those advertising dollars on the social media network. And that is in many ways going to be seed money for creating a parallel economy that respects the First Amendment. So I'm going to give you a small example. It's like tourism bureaus. They spend money on digital. They spend money on Facebook. They spend money on Twitter because they want people to come and visit their state. If the state passed a law that says that any of these businesses that censor people who engage in legal speech, which Twitter and Facebook do, Well, it's not like the government's not going to spend that money. Instead, what's going to happen is they're going to look for an alternative social media network where they can possibly spend some dollars, one of which might be Gab. And having that parallel economy creating the seed money for it, the opportunity for it, is eventually going to potentially create like real competitors to these businesses, so that they then have to make a much harder choice. So if it's just Montana, South Carolina, Oklahoma, a few states, they may be able to ignore that, but they can't ignore is that a company that would not otherwise exist or would not otherwise get that leg up to be able to get that seed money from those government contracts to grow and to evolve and to develop and start to take more and more market share away from them. That could be a problem. And if this catches on, we get a state like Texas, a state like Florida, and it continues to snowball because it starts with a few states. And basically, then those legacy dinosaur companies, dinosaur financial institutions, tech companies like AWS, or social media companies like Twitter, then the choice becomes a lot harder. So I'm going to go through the policy objectives in specific that we're going to use to advocate for, against corporate censorship. So I just want to run through them and just tell you what the bases are we're covering. So the establishment of free-speech states. So just like you have, and this is also another, I'm going on a tangent here, but this is another parallel, is that I remember growing up looking at maps of states where you could get a concealed carry permit. And it was just a handful of states. But the advocates of the Second Amendment were persistent, and they covered state after state after state. And now you look at a map, and it's almost all the states. There's just a few tiny holdouts where you can't, and eventually that created enough pressure, I suspect, at the judiciary level that we get a Heller decision, which is now why you can get a concealed carry permit in Washington, D.C., shall issue. So that's the sort of success we want to emulate. That's the model we want to learn from and follow. So going back specifically to the objectives, one is that government spending on social networks that censor legal speech. No state agency or subordinate government. Remember, the state has sovereignty over every government under it. So if we pass this in Oklahoma, they can make it applicable to Oklahoma City. They might have some left-leaning city where they love censoring free speech, but if the state controls it, like say Texas, they can prevent the city of Austin from doing business, from buying ads on a social media network. So prevent them from allocating any taxpayer dollars for marketing or other purpose with a corporation that runs a publicly available social network where legal, constitutionally protected speech is censored. Okay. Next up, corporations that engage with deplatforming. No state agency or subordinate government, that covers everything right down to little townships, shall contract with any corporation providing technical or other legal services that deny services on the basis of legally protected speech, political activity, or operating a legal business. Now look, I'm not really a big marijuana legalization advocate, right? But there's some states where they have legalized it. Some banks don't want to do business with them. Well, guess what? If they decide to no longer do business with them, decide to no longer do business with Gab, decide to no longer do business with a gun shop or a gun manufacturer, well, then they're not going to get any business from the state. Next up, conducting businesses with blacklisting financial institutions. The state and all subordinate governments, important phrase, shall hold no accounts and shall permit no state finances to transact using banks, payment processors, or other financial institutions that blacklist customers on the basis of legal speech, constitutionally protected political activity, or operating a legal business. So all of these banks that maybe the state government uses a payment processor, or let's say their employees have an account with a bank and they want direct deposit, nope. You've got to open a bank account with an institution that respects the First Amendment, that does not deplatform. And any of them that are found to, they'll put on a blacklist. The state government will no longer transact business with them. Next, contracting with corporations that engage in political employment discrimination. So the state and all subordinate governments shall be prohibited from contracting with any corporation that is fired or discriminates in hiring on the basis of an individual exercise of legally protected speech or political activity. There was a gentleman named James Damore who wrote actually a really well-reasoned essay about some of the issues around sex or gender, other affirmative action programs at Google, and how to better accomplish those goals. He was fired for that. Guess what? No more government contracts at the state level for Google or for any other company that fires somebody. In fact, one of our employees here at Look at America, our first hire, was released from their job because they just attended the January 6th political protest. They didn't go near the Capitol, just went to the Trump rally at the White House and left. Completely legal. Let go from their job. We're fortunate enough to hire him. He's the leader of our research group. We're very proud to have Ian Camacho on our staff, but the corporation that did that to him, no more business with the state government. None. Finally, investment in anti-free speech corporations. The state and all subordinate governments shall not invest pension, rainy day, or any other funds in corporations that censor legally protected speech or political activity among their employees or users of their services, and the state and subordinate government shall divest all funds currently invested in such corporations. Now, we've seen similar divestment efforts. Again, I'm not commenting on any politics outside the narrow scope of Look at America tonight, but companies that have been targeted for divestment that maybe they do business with Israel or something like that, or in the past with like South Africa. States have been very aggressive with that in the past. There's no reason they can't be aggressive with it again, but this time on behalf of their own citizens who are having their First Amendment rights abrogated by these corporations. Look, you can censor our speech, you can kick us off your platforms, you can unperson us, you can cancel our bank accounts, but you can't get wealthy off of the taxpayer dollars from the same people whose rights you're denying. Now, we articulated in our objectives a few specifications to make sure there aren't any loopholes. So, for example, we prevent subcontractors. So maybe a contractor will hire subcontractors on a ban list. Well, that's not allowed. We provide support for reporting violations and legal protections for anybody alleging violations. So the state must provide a reasonable means of and support for making allegations of violations of these listed prohibitions, and offer legal and privacy protection to individuals who make such allegations. This is known as effectively whistleblower protections. Allocations of state resource for enforcement. You may have heard after the last election that, no, we didn't find any problems. We didn't find any problems because you didn't look for any problems. We require an agency within the state government to be responsible for enforcing this if they're to pass the prohibitions, because otherwise they're meaningless. And finally, a speedy timeline for enactment of prohibitions. I understand if a government at the state level or city level is armpit deep in a contract with Amazon Web Services, they can't turn it off overnight. We're not going to give them a 10-year horizon. It must be done soon, ideally within 1 year, to detangle themselves from those corporations, or for those corporations to change their policy on deplatforming tech companies, or like what happened to Parler with Amazon Web Services. So either they have a 1 year to remedy it, or we find somebody else that can provide the same services, which is really going to create a tidal wave of opportunities for small tech firms to take this business away that otherwise would have gone to these big evil corporations who are censoring us and taking away our rights. All of this, which I just read, you can find at lookaheadamerica.org/speech. You can find these policy objectives, but you can also find some template model legislation. Before I talk about that, I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can help make this happen, then we'll take questions. So what I just read to you, it sounds very exciting. It sounds like a dream world, honestly. Could you imagine living in a state that passed a law like this, and all of the wonderful chaos and good trouble that would ensue? Well, the reality is that whether that happens or not is entirely dependent upon you and you personally. Look at America is at its heart America First community organizers. And one of the tools in the community organizer toolbox is educating state legislators on policies that can change the state and community for the better. So it's incumbent on you to take the initiative to find out who your state legislator is. Find out what the geography is that they represent. Find others who agree with you on this issue. Educate them. Gather them for a meeting, for a town hall, for a visit to the office of your state legislature, to educate them on this and demand that they take action. To find others in your state to do the same. To build enough people in the state legislature that will introduce a piece of legislation. That is a small victory. All of these are small victories. Even if it doesn't pass the first time it's introduced, just getting introduced is a tremendous step forward, and it will inspire other states to do the same. So by continuing to grow your own network of your own community organizing effort in your own state, in your own community, by making sure that your state legislator knows your name and knows when they see your face that there's going to be hell to pay, because you don't represent just yourself, but your entire church, your neighborhood, a broader community that shares our interests. That is what gets their attention. That's what gets them to swipe their desk aside of all the other stuff that's on it and put your issues at the forefront, on the front burner. And that's what we're counting on you to do. We recently had our national training conference in Dallas, where I had the privilege of training, I'd say about 30 dedicated community organizers who'd never done this stuff before in their lives. And never having done it before is not an excuse. In fact, that's a pretty good motivation to get involved and to get engaged. Now, this is your opportunity. Look Ahead America. We will train you. We'll give you the resources you need. We'll give you guidance. We'll connect you to other people in your state. So I urge you to take action. Sign up to volunteer at lookaheadamerica.org/volunteer. You'll get our emails. You'll get our messages. You'll get invited to webinars like these. We're going to be doing a webinar 2 weeks from now on voter registration. And lean on us to provide resources, information, and guidance on how you can help make your state a free state, a free speech state. Make your state pass laws that fortify the integrity of the elections rather than fortifying an outcome. Steps you can take to put pressure on federal legislators to respect the constitutional rights of the many patriotic Americans who've been persecuted and are being treated as they would in North Korea for not what they did, but for what they believe. So we're an avenue for you to take to become engaged in your community, to make all of these things happen. But all we can be is the avenue. You're the one that has to walk down it. So with that, I will open the floor for questions. Does anybody have any questions on this specifically or anything more broadly? You can type them in the chat or just go ahead and shout out. I see my good friend Michael Voss is on. Good to see you, buddy. This could be a very short webinar. I'll take a moment to talk a little bit about ours coming up on April 25th. There's been a lot of excitement about voter registration. I don't think there's an organization in the country that has registered more people than Look Ahead America has, particularly in the state of Arizona. I haven't done the new numbers, but I think we're at over 12,000 over the last year, less than a year that we've been able to register in that state. I'll be discussing voter registration strategy because I've been doing it since 1994, I think. And we'll also be bringing on John Restuccia, who is the leader of the field organizer for Maricopa County, field director for Maricopa County, and our registration program out there. And I don't think there's anybody in the country in the last year who spent more time standing around with a clipboard in all kinds of different places trying to register new patriotic Americans. So with that, do we have any questions?
Yes, Matt. Can you hear me?
Go ahead, Michael.
Okay. I typed this into the chat, so I don't know if you saw that while you were speaking. One question that comes to my mind is about Article 230. It's been used as a catch-all savings for the major internet overlords, I like to call them, where we have seen them go into Congress. They have presented, at least I am familiar documenting since 2018, 6 times that Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Google have been before Congress, both at the Senate and on the House, and they have claimed Article 230 protection for their actions, which seem to be very editorial, seem to be very arbitrary in the enforcement of their regulations. And even as they have been called out, they've either said it's been an error, as we saw from Twitter when 800,000 individuals were silenced, including members of Congress, or they have stated that they are protected by Article 230.
Right. Well, I see your question. I'll just cut to the chase. Is that
Sure.
That is ultimately reforming Section 230 is a federal matter. Now, I'm of the persuasion that companies should either have to choose that they are a publisher and have liability for what is published, or they're a common carrier, like, I don't know, your T-Mobile or AT&T, and they don't get to censor, but they don't have liability. They have to choose one or the other, because right now these tech companies get the benefit of being both, where they can censor, but they also have complete immunity. So I think making that disappear at the federal level, I mean, that's something that gets talked about a lot. Oddly enough, the political party you think would be most enthusiastic about changing it doesn't seem to be getting the job done because maybe too many of them have taken money from certain folks, or too many lobbyists have their hooks into them. I don't know, but that is a federal matter. There's nothing we can do about that at the state level. What we can control at the state level is how that budget is spent. So anyway, unfortunately, 230 is kind of outside the scope of what Look Ahead America can accomplish now. Look and see if there. So here's a question from Chapter Master Dante. Even Gab limits doxing in their terms of service. So technically, would they not qualify for government contracts? I guess not. They'd probably have to change that policy. Although the question is really a matter of legal speech. And I think that the legal, the other thing they don't allow is pornography. But I think that the legal speech of a free speech standard needs to be town square. So I know that it is illegal in many states to share private information publicly about somebody, right? So that's not permitted legally, so that wouldn't be legal speech. So doxing technically is not legal. It may also fall afoul of several other laws that I may not be aware of. So so preventing people from doxing folks on a platform, I'm not sure that would necessarily be a violation of town square standard of legal speech. And when I say town square, that's a well-established standard recognized by the Supreme Court and everybody else. But what's also not protected by the town square is specifically pornography, for example. So that is, particularly since it's primarily a commercial form of speech, that has different regulations on it. And we can go back to Supreme Court rulings about the difference between being allowed to put a newspaper stand on a street corner versus a penny saver on a street corner. And actually, one of the reasons, and I took advantage of this since I was a very, very young kid, is the reason penny savers allow you to publish op-eds is because if they didn't, then they'd be purely commercial and they wouldn't have the same protection. So they give you those, though the penny saver has a little op-ed in it, so that it counts as political speech, which has the highest level of protection. And that's what I mean when I'm talking about town square standard of free speech. So any other questions about this or some of the other matters that Look Ahead has covered? Fortunately, we've not talked too much about election stuff, so maybe YouTube won't pull this down, but we're going to put it back up on Rumble as well. Without anything else, I want to thank all the wonderful people. If this is your first time at one of our webinars, glad you came. Please sign up for updates at lookaheadamerica.org if you want to support our efforts. Please make a contribution, tax deductible, and unlike contributions to candidates, not disclosed to anyone, at lookaheadamerica.org/donate. We look forward to seeing you guys again in about 2 weeks to talk about voter registration. So say it with me. America first, America forever. Good night.